Hello, everyone. This is Greg Selkoe, talking with Mel King, who is, to me, it's a very special opportunity, having grown up in Boston my entire life, and reading about Mel and all the good work he's done. So it's an honor to be able to sit down with you and have a chat. So I appreciate that. So this is Mel King, everyone.
Well, it's interesting to be here and hearing you talk about my history here. I find that you're very kind as you characterize it.
Thank you. So why don't we start by, so people who don't know, Mel was once a candidate for mayor of Boston when I was just probably in diapers at that point. But and I've heard lots about him, and he's done a lot of activism in Boston even prior to that, where he helped secure a parking lot site for affordable housing, which is now right in the center of the city. A lot of other things. He was really a civil rights activist for a long time. But I think that hasn't changed. Obviously, you're still doing a lot of activism, and so maybe you want to talk about some of the things you're working on currently.
Three things that I'm working on as we speak. Start with the South End Technology Center, an opportunity for persons to get access to the technology. When I retired from MIT as an emeritus in 96, I thought that it would be important to open up a center where people could get access. One of the things that prompted me to do this had to do with a history of growing up in a country and a culture where people who look like me were not treated in the media with what I call respect for their humanity and person. The computer provided people with an opportunity to tell their stories, and not to have other people portraying them in ways that were not flattering to them.
So it's sort of like the democratization of media.
I think that's a good way to put it. I had no idea in putting this together that the Facebook or social media would blossom from it. But the fact is, it is an opportunity for people not only to tell their story, not only to use it as a way to get into the economy job-wise, but also so that they can be creators and not just consumers of somebody else's stuff.
Do you have a Facebook page?
I do. I don't do the Facebook as much as lots of people think I do. I got a lot of friends, and
Not surprised.
I'm not sure that I'm good at staying in touch with them because I kind of like the idea of having that personal contact.
What are your thoughts on how we can, shorten the gap and bridge the digital divide?
Well, I think it's happening. One of the reasons why in 1994 organized a conference which was about, at that time, called the Information Highway. And I thought about the National Defense Highway System, I-95, and others that go through cities, states, wherever, and that a lot of people can't get on or off. They have to go in lots of different directions. And I said that the Information Highway looks like it's going to be the same, that people aren't going to be able to get on it. And so the conference was called, at MIT, ran it, and got people in to talk about how everybody could get access to it. That led to talking with some of the community agencies about how it could be a vehicle for their fundraising and for their communication with people. And as that unfolded, began to see why it was important to open up the center. And what we witness now, we have youth who are in a program called Learn to Teach, Teach to Learn. They have their blogs. They are able to show the things that they have created, developed to people around the world. And as a result, they've been invited to Alaska to work with children and adults there. One of them went to Holland. We had another one who went to Peru. We can just look at ways that, because their use of the technology to show and share what they've accomplished, reaches other youth who talk to some of the people running programs. How can we get this to happen here? We are providing is not only the computer, but the latest in the technology, because of the relationship that we have with MIT's Media Lab, the Center for Bits and Atoms, which allows us to get equipment that is state-of-the-art, and also for our youth to participate over there and get the access to the latest programs, whether it's Scratch, GIMP, that are developed at the MIT Media Lab. What I like most about the program is the idea that they become models and are part of what we call developing a critical mass and cultural change, to get lots of the youth in our community working toward what we call science, technology, engineering, and math in STEM, although we like to put a little steam in it by adding the A of art in it. And at some point...
Creativity is an important part of any type of technology.
It's where they feel the most positive about participating in the program. Mm-hmm. They step back and say, wow, we made that. Just before coming over, there was a race of little cars that were made and programmed by students from the McKinley School. Mm-hmm. And they were able to get right out on the sidewalk, put them down, and turn them loose to see which car was going to cross the finish line first. You can't tell them that they don't know how to do this stuff, and what it does for their personality, their character, their sense of power, for me, is wonderful to watch the technology.
Where does the funding come from?
Basis that we have comes from my relationship in MIT. Department Urban Studies and Planning has been very, very supportive, and so for the past 15 years, they've covered most of the lease. We then get some equipment from the Center for Bits and Atoms, the Media Lab, and we also have participation of some of the undergraduate, graduate students from MIT.
Has the city given you money?
Well, the city, it's an interesting way to frame it. There's a fund called the Timothy Smith Fund. And Timothy Smith was a merchant in Roxbury well over 100 years ago, and left a trust fund which could not be used until 100 years were up. And when it was up, the mayor said that it would be used for technology. And so every 3 years we get new technology that allows us to keep up with the changes. So we're able to do that. Looking at some of the summer jobs that the youth were doing, and they were out in the neighborhoods doing cleanup and things, very important. But we thought that it might be a little different if they could learn the technology and then have a job teaching it and get paid for doing that. So we got some foundation support initially, and lately, each year from the city, we get maybe 15 to 20 youth who the city pays for, who become part of the Learn to Teach program. The rest of the money we raise from foundations. We've initially had some very good success with just asking for donations from the public.
We got some computers from us, so that worked quick.
And you'll be on our list of folks that we appreciate.
So can I ask you a question? So, obviously centers like yours, like the Technology Center, are important. Do you feel that the public schools in Boston are providing enough of this training in art, not just technology, but art, technology, and science?
No. Straight out. When the new superintendent came, I invited her to the center, and she sat in the circle with about 30 of the youth that we had as part of the program. The first was, how do you deal with teachers who don't like us? How do we get them out of the system? The second thing they said was, why don't we have more art in the schools? Now, these are the students themselves. And I think that it's very important that there be a real integration of the arts, music, etc., in the schools.
Obviously, you've been in politics in Boston for a long time, and I think you've sort of earned the right to speak your mind, and everyone respects that. And, I haven't heard a lot of other people comment on this, but when Mayor Menino was elected, he said that, judge me on the schools, and he's very proud of the condition of the Boston public schools. Do you think in the 20 years that he's been mayor that he's actually succeeded in what he said?
Oh, not at all. Well, not at all is very strong, okay? We have underperforming schools. That's documented. Right? We have schools they call turnaround schools, and that's documented. Well, why are they called those things? Because they have not provided the youth with the kinds of skills and social development that is important for them in people's minds to make it in this world.
I think particularly given the fact that Boston, unlike many other cities, has it's a lot of money. We're actually not struggling financially the way Baltimore and other places, but we give a very small percentage relative to the condition of the schools and what is needed to public education. Why do you think that is?
Well, so there's an aspect of what's going on in the schools that is not totally left to the people running the schools, okay? And there are issues with the unions, all right? Issues with the fact that people running the schools are not as into a belief that all the children can learn. And for me, the biggest problem is the low expectation. Right? We have algebra as a ceiling when calculus ought to be the floor. And if you have calculus as the floor, that means you're going to believe that all the children can learn to do the calculus. And when you don't, then and with the MCAS, all it's doing is proving that you don't believe that the youth can get it, and that there's got to be only one way that the teachers are supposed to try and get youth up to a point where they can feel that they're competent to do things. So I think that in terms of the schools, the biggest issue is the low expectations. And if you have a school with high expectations, then people treat the children like they believe that they can get it, and they will and can.
Definitely. So we won't talk about politics too much, but since you were almost the mayor of Boston at one point, you got pretty close and certainly made national news, certainly being the first African-American candidate and really viable. You really almost won the election. What do you think of the current state of the sort of city politics or the mayor's sort of current responsibilities vis-a-vis running again or continuing his what will be now 24 years if he gets reelected?
Well, I didn't support the mayor in his last election. The problem is that the members of the communities of color whose children are in school, for some strange reason, vote for him, and it doesn't give them any incentive to do anything when they're voting for him and they're not delivering on the schools. So why would he change?
Why do you think, I mean, having talked to people around the city and particularly in communities of color, and Maria and I talk to people all the time, when you talk to younger people, they're very dissatisfied with how the city's run. They don't feel like their voice is heard. They don't think it's right that someone's been in office for 2 decades and basically runs the city like, his private fiefdom. But why is it that he still does well with the African Americans who are, and Latinos and other groups that are over, I would say, 35, 40, and up? He still does very well in those communities. What is it that makes them vote for him?
I wish I knew, because it's baffling. Communities of color need to look around and see what their status is. High crime rates, a lot of the youth being either killed or injured from guns, and all the ways in which they don't feel that they're getting access to jobs, education, etc. And if you have that kind of climate, then you want to see somebody in office who's going to deal with that. But having said that, I think it is important that the community itself owns some of the problems that are going on. One of the students asked me, black male, said, "Don't you know what we're up against? When are you going to stick up for us?" And before I could answer, he said, "You all don't stick up for yourselves, so how could I expect you to stick up for me and for us?" And as I processed that, I said, this young man was looking for love. And what he was saying is, you all don't love yourself enough to look out for yourself, so how can I expect you to look out for me?
Given all that, and given the fact that we have had someone in office so long, and I travel a lot, and you go to other cities and mayoral elections and city council races, they're contested, people vote. Why do you think? I mean, the turnout in Boston for mayoral elections is 1/4 of what turned out for the presidential election. So most people aren't. The mayor's never gotten a majority of the city of Boston residents to vote for him who are eligible. He gets. Scott Brown, the Republican, in the last election got more votes in the city of Boston than the mayor got in his winning election. Why aren't people involved? Why aren't there more leaders who are concerned about the things on a local level?
When you have a media that's supposed to be dealing with the schools, with the community and its education, that isn't getting the story out. And I think we can go on in terms of really having a media that pinpoints the issues that are in the schools. The Globe, for example, isn't a place where you can really look at their characterization of what's going on in the city.
You talked in the beginning of the interview about, the technology center and the kids being the media. How about what if you guys did a project where you created a blog that, where you had the kids themselves that were in your technology center do their own analysis and have it be just about public education in Boston?
Well, that's a good idea. We tried to do it in what we call a positive sense by modeling what works and having the youth talk to other youth and people about works. And we're seeing how that catches the attention of other youth, not only here, but across the country. So we need to do more of that with some of the adults, to get them involved and getting them to do the speaking and demonstrating about what kinds of things can happen positively in the city, and particularly for the schools. I think it's a good model that you're proposing.
if the media itself, the sort of mainstream media, the old school media we're talking about, doesn't cover these stories, but there are people out there who want to know it. I mean, I think we try to do that with Future Boston, which is with our organization, is try to talk about, you know, we're upset about some of the things that are going on in the city. We think we're losing talent, and there really hasn't been enough progress on race relations and a lot of other things that, you know, the mayor says has happened, and then no one questions it. And I think so. We're trying to be a bit of a media source, and we've gotten some press, and we've been controversial, which has been very strange for Boston. There was a time when people used to speak their mind in Boston, but apparently now no one does that anymore. And when you do, it's just, you know, people can't believe it. But you know, I think no one knows it better than the kids who have been in the system, right? And so maybe, you know, if there was maybe something we could work on together, if there was a way to tell the story more, so that it wasn't just coming from the reporters that the mayor has on speed dial who kind of print his press releases. Well,
one of the projects we want to try and develop is what I call Future Core.
I like the name.
And with it, CORE, so that they get to be the core of what's going to happen in the future. Is different from AmeriCorps. It's okay, but having it with that kind of a framework, I think, makes a difference. And the idea would be to have the youth do what you described, to do the analysis of the city, its role and relationship, particularly as it affects youth, and then come up with some of the solutions and suggestions and ideas with the tools that you have, that we have at the center, would make a big difference in getting the stories out.
Great. So why don't we? We're running a little bit out of time, but why don't you talk a little bit about your T-shirt? I know you wanted to talk about that and what that means and what you're working on in that regard.
When you think of it, we now have more folks incarcerated than we did when Martin Luther King Jr. gave his I Have a Dream speech. 3 strikes and the legislation that dealt with crack cocaine and marijuana, specifically geared toward communities of color. You know that when all the statistics and records show that there's more drug abuse and use in middle-class white communities than there are in communities of color, and yet the folks in communities of color end up getting arrested and jailed at a rate that's phenomenal. So that we now, as a country, have the highest rate of incarceration of people anywhere on the planet. And so in the same ways that we were boycotting different businesses that were not doing right in the 60s, I'm suggesting that we got to boycott prisons. And the tie-in is that the prisons have become the new slavery bastions. And they are consciously, and it's been interesting to hear people from some of the communities where they do have prisons say, if you stop the incarceration rate, then we'll lose jobs and lose resources in our communities. That's slavery. Oh, business, right. That's slavery. Yeah. All right? Keeping people jailed, locked up, in order to provide employment. You may not know it, but people out there, at least 2 years ago, for every 2 inmates, there was 1 corrections personnel. And I asked people...
It'd be nice if every 2 students there was 1 teacher.
Right, that's exactly what I asked. How do we get a situation where for every 2 students we have a teacher, right? But that's the kind of thing that's going on. But as we begin to think about all the things that are necessary, we have to get into this business of let's boycott the jails. I think some of the best ways have to deal with youth being able to participate in marketing what the values and ideas are that would make a difference in this country.
Thank you very much, Mel King, a Boston legend. It was great talking to you and very enlightening. So, and I look forward to helping out with the Technology Center. So thank you very much for speaking with me.
Well, thank you for giving the folks the opportunity to express the issues and concerns and ways to make this place work for everybody.